Welcome to 2020 Politics War Room with James Carville in New Orleans. I'm Al Hunt here in Washington at American University. We are proud partners with the Sign Institute. And by the way, the AU Eagles are in the Patriot League playoffs. Bednar Arena Thursday night. Everybody within walking or driving distance ought to be going there. We have a good guest later, Roger Altman. But first, let me ask you to subscribe, rate, and review 2020 Politics War Room on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to your podcast. James, I guess we have a little bit of politics to talk about. Between us, we have covered or run American political campaigns for combined probably more than 80 years. I doubt we have ever seen a political dynamic like this. A week ago, there was a raging debate, could Bernie Sanders be stopped? Some of the smartest Democrats were talking about pressuring Joe Biden to get out to clear the way for Mike Bloomberg, and Elizabeth Warren was waiting in the wings. After Super Tuesday now, Jim Clyburn launched Joe Biden in South Carolina. Biden is now the front runner. He won 10 contests yesterday. Bernie's campaign seems to have peaked in Nevada. Mike Bloomberg has gotten out after spending over $500 million. And there's no rationale for Elizabeth Warren, who finished third in her home state of Massachusetts. I have one comment. Wow.
Well, I as you know, if I've been right about anything in this, is I've not predicted anything because I thought that this was so volatile and so crazy that these kind of twists and turns are inevitable. The Clyburn endorsement, it just changed. It changed everything. I mean, it's Mike Tyson. They said, these say he hits you so hard he changes the way you taste. Well, the Clyburn thing hit the Democratic Party so hard we don't taste things the same anymore. And once Democratic voters, and to a large extent African-American voters, so all the candidates in South Carolina, all of them fight for the votes, and Biden wins them overwhelmingly, that's a clear signal to them that that's our guy. And you started to see it in the New Hampshire returns, where it was the suburbs that were increasing the turnout. That carried through in South Carolina, where most of the turnout was in the more educated white suburbs. And you look at the Virginia returns, and look at Loudoun and Fairfax, I guess Prince William, Alexandria City. You're seeing the same thing. So Bernie has no appeal to our most historic and important demographic, African Americans, and he has little appeal, if any, to our newest and in many ways most exciting demographic, which is these college-educated people, particularly white women. So I thought that was a impressive display of strength, but with key demographics last night. And I said last night on television, I believe this. Of course, Bernie, the revolution will go on, and they'll be doing this and that, but they're going to face a different environment out there. In 2016, the attitude, well, Hillary's probably win anyway, and why are y'all fooling with him? And then in 2008, 20 was, well, he's got a guy with a point, and he's leading in the polls, and he's a front runner. Now people are going to get aggravated at him and say, look, you're just getting in the way. On a revolution, the average Democrat around the country is looking for the revolution to get Trump out of there. And so I think the dynamic has changed.
Yeah, I think you're right. Look, as Joe Biden would say, there is no doubt that some of that great appeal, that great vote he registered winning in Massachusetts and Minnesota when he hadn't set foot in them, no doubt some of it was, as you said earlier, what Jim Clyburn launched, and a lot of it was just anti-Trump. He does, the scope is impressive. He does incredibly well among African Americans. He does very well among suburban women, and he has more appeal than many Democrats, including Hillary Clinton, among working class whites. But we have to keep in mind, this is Joe Biden, and as much as one may like him, the idea that suddenly he is a brilliant candidate with a brilliant campaign may be a bit of a reach. And if Terry McAuliffe and Jim Clyburn were saying last Saturday and Sunday he's got to reshape this campaign, he's got to reshape the kind of speeches he gives, the kind of appearances he makes, that's still true despite that enormous victory on Tuesday.
Well, It is, and they're going to have to look. They didn't have an office in Minnesota. All right, they had one office in California, Los Angeles. They shut it down to go to South Carolina. So what happened is that the Democratic Party just collectively, in the period between South Carolina and Super Tuesday, which was 72 hours,
right?
It collectively just made a decision. That's it. It's Joe Biden. And if you look at the actual election day vote, if it wouldn't have been for early voting, he'd have won by more.
Yeah,
but everybody
he might even carry California. I'm not sure of that, but
right.
he's within 8 or 9.
In general elections, the polls don't sway that much one way or the other. I mean, you get a 2-3 point swing, where both of the candidates are really known. That's pretty impressive. Primaries are a lot different, and when primaries start to break. In a general election, you have an ideological floor that you're just not going to go below. In primaries, it's different. And it just, once it started to break, it started to break across the board. And I just think going forward, Democratic voters are going to say to themselves, look, we did the deal on Super Tuesday. How much more do you want us to do? And I mean, I think they'll do it again on the 17th or whatever the next big round of voting we have. I think Florida and Michigan, states like that.
Next Tuesday is Michigan, and Bernie carried that last time, and the Sanders people have been saying that's one of their 3 or 4. He carried against Hillary Clinton. That's one of their 3 or 4 strongest states. I mean that is a big that's a big matchup next Tuesday, and if Joe Biden can knock him off in Michigan. It doesn't end the Bernie campaign, as you said, it's going to go on. But I think any faint hopes they have of being the nominee end after that, because this is a state he expected to win. This is the Wolverines against the Spartans, James.
Right. They have a problem. If this continues, I'd like to see the odds that Biden wins the popular vote and has a plurality of delegates, because if that becomes the case. But of course, they'll just switch. But that they will be charged with massive hypocrisy.
Something new and different.
Yeah, but it won't stop them. Okay, but the point is going to be made. But wait a minute, you were screaming and yelling that the person that had the most, which is I don't buy the argument. Yeah, you got to get a majority. That's the party rules. I mean, you came in. That's what you play by. But they don't care about rules. They just make them up as they go along.
Well, with that critical caveat of what you said a minute ago, that the unexpected happens, that there are twists and turns that none of us anticipate. As of today, I think that may become a moot point, because this is a mano a mano race, if you will, now. Yeah. And I think it's perfectly possible, again, a very important caveat, that Joe Biden goes into Milwaukee with a majority, not a plurality of delegates. There's only going to be, 2, 3, 5% that aren't committed to one of those top 2 front runners.
Yeah, and you're right. Let's remind ourselves. I mean, I'm very happy but we're still, the one thing one prediction I will make, and I'm gonna be very firm on this. He's going to say some goofy stuff between now and election day.
You mean like last night, confusing his sister and wife? I mean,
yes, because it's still Joe Biden. Okay, let's before everybody jump there. I think he's 1,000 times better than what we got. I think he's a decent guy. He's an honorable man. But
right, exactly. Right. Exactly, and he's got to have a campaign that has people in states and knows where to send surrogates and all that, and maybe they can do it themselves. I
think Bloomberg's going to give him the keys to his car. Hopefully.
Oh, listen, let me tell you this. I mean, I'll say a couple things, because I worked for Bloomberg News for a while. I don't know Michael well, but I know him. He obviously thought he would be the best candidate, the best president. I think they're going to get a bum rap that the theory of their case was all flawed. Well, it wasn't all flawed. It just was that they didn't think that Joe Biden could make a comeback like this. If Joe Biden hadn't, there would still be a theory of that case. But he and Biden are actually friends. And he will do whatever it takes to help Joe Biden. Of that, there is no question. I don't know what the campaign finance law's limits are, but it'll be a huge help. And I don't know what Warren's going to do, James.
Well, let's dissect this for a second. First of all, she does probably, These things never go one for one.
Right.
But she's going to have a hard time carrying on just for the simple reason is the only question she's going to get is, why are you doing this?
Right.
All right. And that's no fun. And when you spend the first 3 minutes of any event explaining, and the rationale is kind of, and she's in a really sticky wicket because she ran third in Massachusetts. I actually think, weirdly enough, the Massachusetts result last night was pretty good for her. Because,
really?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you why. What she has to be concerned about is that the Bernie Sanders people primary her in 2024. And if you look at the combined Biden-Warren vote, Massachusetts primary may not be as Bernie bro as if we have assumed going into it. So to that extent, it makes, I think she can breathe a little bit easier on the primary threat.
Well, that's 4 years away, and I think you make a good point, but that doesn't address what she's going to do in the next 4 days, the next 4 weeks.
I think she's going to drop out. For the simple reason is that she has a very loyal fundraising base, but she's not going to get a chance to say anything. And the only question she's going to get is, why are you doing this? What's your path? What are you trying to accomplish here? And, you got to get up every morning. You got to raise money. You got to do events. And that's hard when there's no path. And she's a very determined person. She may decide that, the kind of dream is you have some kind of somebody is, 50 delegates short of the nomination, and you make this sterling deal with Joe Biden to give him your delegates, and you become Treasury Secretary or something. I have no idea, but maybe that's in the back of her mind somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's right. And, it'll be, she'll get squeezed from both sides. The establishment of the party, such as it is, will want her out because they clear the way for Joe Biden. And the Bernie people are going to want her out. They're going to bring a lot of pressure on her. They want Bernie to have a clearer field. So I think she is going to get out. Let me, James, pick up, because we know now what Trump is going to do. We now know what Trump and his lackeys on Capitol Hill, like Lindsey Graham and the never always astute Ron Johnson from Wisconsin, are going to do. They're going to start to try to smear Joe Biden every chance they get. And they only have really, really one vehicle, and that's his son, Beau, who has had a troubled life, never should have taken a job with a Ukraine energy company. And they will smear him, every chance they get. And they have material on Beau. None of that, other than the fact that two things. Number one, parent loyalty, and number two, bad judgment on his staff's part and his part of letting Beau do that. There is nothing about Joe Biden in Ukraine that is anything but admirable and good and clean. He got rid of the bad people that the Rudy Giulianis were trying to keep. That's just the fact.
That's not going to deter him at all. By the way, just in the, I just got he just texted me, and I looked, it's posted. Ron Brownstein has a new piece in the Atlantic posted about the effects of yesterday. So anybody that's listening to the show after the show is over, I think Albert and I, it's safe to say we read every word that Ron Brownstein writes. So I'm going to look forward to reading his analysis.
Yeah, I do too. Ron Brownstein, Tom Etzelman. I mean, we got an all-star team of people we follow, James. But you agree that it won't stop Trump, and they will go and they'll try to smear. Now, what's tougher for them with Bernie, who had never actually really been fully vetted, even when he ran last time as a presidential candidate, there was all kinds of new material they could bring up, and they could, some of it was real, some of it they would demagogue. 99% of what's out there about Joe is known. They're not going to be able to bring up new stuff, so they're going to have to lie, which I know, James, this will shock you, but that's what Donald Trump does.
Okay, but that's going to be really hard for him to do. Gee, I'd like to see the person that stands up and says, "Sir, that's a lie."
But this is bad.
422nd time we've done that.
This is bad news for Trump and the Republicans, because you're right. I mean, Joe's going to say some silly, dumb things, and maybe there'll be another twist and turn we can't anticipate. Who knows? But all things being equal, Joe Biden is going to beat him in a general election, and the Trump people know that, and that'll make them more desperate. And you know what happens when they get desperate.
Right. In the combination of the virus, which he, in his primitive way, sees as a threat to him. That thing it's personal to him. He doesn't understand what it is. And from the start, he's always been in a panic about Biden. So that's the result of the Ukraine thing. That's everything. This, and he's to say he's unstable. It doesn't even give a true glimpse into what he really is. And this will drive him even further off the ledge. And Paul Begala wrote something interesting. He said that on the day that Biden is nominated at a convention, he's going to say he's going to pick Nikki Haley and not Mike Pence to try to muck up the story. I thought it was a kind of a clever way, but he's going to do stuff like that. You're going to see him.
Oh, he'll do whatever it takes. He has really, really deep loyalty to one person, Donald Trump. That's it. It stops at the water's edge, as they say, and he'll do anything, and he'll get desperate, and it's going to be very, very ugly, because that's we have given a big shout out, and with great justification, to Ron Brownstein and Tom Etzel. There's another one, and James, you put me on this story. George Packard's piece in the Atlantic in the current issue. If you think you were scared of 4 more years of Donald Trump, if you think that was an existential threat, read the George Packard piece, and you will be twice as scared. You will be twice as upset. You will be twice as likely to book a flight to New Zealand. Or what it is, it's a chilling piece, and it is brilliantly done.
And like everything that George does, I mean, it's elegantly written. It's really put together well, and it just shows you. Basically, I don't think we're a constitutional republic right now. I really don't. And I mean, one of the reasons that Biden's got to win this thing, we got to get some semblance of the rule of law back in this country. I mean, these guys are pretty. When the Attorney General sets up a hotline for the president's lawyer to investigate the president's political enemies, I think that's not. We'll have to check with Walter Dillinger, but I think we're going outside the norms of law.
What I was first starting to write about politics a little bit was in 1968. I really was in the Boston Bureau of the Wall Street Journal, so they didn't give me much of a chance because we know how arrogant those Washington bureaus are. But Richard Nixon ran for president. One of the things he just said on every speech was, "And I promise, if elected, I will replace the Attorney General." Now, of course, he was going to replace the Attorney General, but it was not only an applause line. There was a feeling that the Johnson administration's was too permissive and all that. I mean, it is Joe Biden. Every speech, I am going to replace the Attorney General, because it's more and more apparent that we have an Attorney General that's much more like the Nixon Attorney General. He is Donald Trump's Roy Cohn.
Yeah, he is. And I love the way the Washington establishment, assured us about him. Right? Wow.
Well, that was kind of the way they assured you about Ken Starr some time ago, didn't they?
Yeah, right. I remember that. I remember Sally Quinn wrote a piece about how Ken Starr was part of the establishment. Good. Y'all want him taken.
Baylor won't take him, I'll tell you that.
No. He's got a distinguished list of clients, too.
Yeah.
How was it he never represented Harvey Weinstein? I thought that would have been right in his wheelhouse.
He might have gotten beaten out for that contractor, and maybe Jeffrey Epstein was offering him more money. I don't know. But, in case anyone missed it, he did write a letter to the New York Times in April saying that these charges against Jeffrey Epstein were exaggerated. It's a good thing to look at.
Just like the charges against big tobacco, against R.J. Reynolds. People just exaggerate that. There's nothing wrong with these guys.
James, getting back to last night, and I think the Biden victory was, everything we have described, and Bloomberg and Warren. I have to say, I think Michael spent like $550 million. I used to love, again, having covered the campaign in 1980, John Connally, former governor of Texas and a Democrat turned Republican, ran. He spent $11 million, which back then was a whole lot of money, and he got one delegate, Ada Mills. I guarantee that however many delegates Michael got, they have probably topped the price per delegate.
I think all records have been shattered.
Yeah, exactly.
But you know what? You got to give Bloomberg. He was true to his word. He said, I got into this thing because I wanted to beat Trump and be getting out on the same terms.
And I think he will make a huge contribution to the Democratic effort, the Democratic Party, and he will do things that Democrats, that this National Committee and others, and the Biden campaign can't do, both because of resources and skill. There will be digital stuff that the Democrats desperately need, and I think he's going to make a huge and an important contribution.
Well, if you read the New Yorker piece on the Republicans' digital operation and the Brad Purcell, it'll scare the living you-know-what out of you.
It will, and I think that the Bloomberg operation is the only thing that can counter that.
If I knew anything about technology, I'd go on TV and do a rant that we're behind, but I don't know enough to...
James, you and I, it's a very, very close contest. Our guy who puts the show on here, Kyle, laughs every time we mention technology. One thing we also ought to mention about yesterday, there were some primaries and some congressional primaries, and two in particular I want to mention. Both, one really good news for the Democrats, and one might be. The first would be North Carolina, where the Republicans came in and in a stealth campaign spent $3 million to try to help a left-wing woman beat the preferred Democratic candidate, Cal Cunningham. It failed. Cunningham won big. He, I think, is at least even money going into the fall running against incumbent Republican Tom Tillis. That's a really important outcome for Democrats.
Very. And they can't. It's so obvious, all of the things that they're trying to do, like putting this woman up to run for this. And what you're going to have is they're going to use a lot of these lefties for the same purpose. And that's coming. And the Republicans, the Russians are going to do the same thing. I guarantee you. It's coming. There's no doubt about it. What's the other congressional
Alabama. The Alabama Senate race, where Jeff Sessions was going back to try to reclaim his seat. Now, I would have preferred Judge Roy Moore to have won. He didn't. But he's in a primary. Jeff Sessions finished second to the former Auburn football coach, Tommy Tuberville, who is now running to the right of Donald Trump. My guess is he's saying things he never said to those great African-American football players.
I don't think when he was recruiting Bo Jackson, he was very Trump.
Yeah.
Maybe it was before Tommy Tuberville. I don't remember.
Yeah, he wasn't bringing up the birther issue or any of that stuff. But it's going to be it could be a bitter primary. And of all the Democrats, the one who is the most vulnerable and probably an underdog is Doug Jones. And I think this, at least, it doesn't mean that he's not an underdog. Still is. It's Alabama, but it's good for him.
They don't. Wade Perry, now the party chair, was one of his top guys. His top guy was a guy named Giles Perkins. I talked to him on the phone almost daily during the 2017 run, and Wade says he honestly believes that Doug has a shot. And I saw Doug in New York last week, and I don't think he's making it up. I think Doug is in the hunt down there. Now, I'd have to see it. I could be persuaded by a good poll that shows something to the contrary. But for some reason, they don't feel that terrible about it.
Well, he can't be. He can only be helped by what promises to be a bitter Republican primary in 4 weeks, with both trying to get to the right of each other and to the right of Donald Trump.
Right. And, it's who knows? The one thing is, if you get that huge relative, that African-American turnout that Doug got in 2017, but it's going to be hard to do in 2020 because the contribution was outsized because it was an off-year election. And it's still tough, but they think not hopeless, and so I'm digging in with them.
You're right. I'd love to talk to some of Tommy Tuberville's recruits and see what he told them back then versus what he's saying now. But Let me just put it this way: if it were Nick Saban, I would be really worried. If I were Doug Jones, Tommy Tuberville, whatever he is,
Yeah, I don't know if
Nick Saban.
Kevin said some of the Alabama people hate Auburn so much. They just found you got to go Auburn, you got to vote for Auburn, you got to vote for a Democrat. You go, geez. Last time I had a child molester, I don't know if they saw. At least I have to make a choice between a child molester and an Auburn person.
Yeah, I went in the Republican convention in 2004 in New York, and I stayed the same hotel as the Alabama delegation. And I get in the elevator, and then they all get in the elevator, and they give me a hard time about Bob Novak. We love Bob Novak, and, he's right and you're wrong. And, they would really get vehement about it. And I finally found the best answer was to say, who's Tide, and who's Auburn. And, man, the elevator divided, and they'd start fighting with each other. So I think you're right.
Yeah. So it's something to say to go, if you're like an Alabama, if you've had to choose between a child molester, a Democrat, and an Auburn person, rank those in terms of negativity.
That's a great poll question.
Yeah. If you graduate from the University of Alabama and you're a Republican, you had one bullet. Who would you shoot first?
You have a nervous breakdown. This has been all right. This has been, as we started off saying, 5 days like we've never seen and may never see again, and who knows what will happen the next 5 days. But keep an eye on Michigan. I think that could be not the end for Bernie, but basically it signals the end.
The thing about Michigan, remember, he won there last time, but I don't think that the establishment, that's my new favorite word, the establishment constitutes everybody that is a Democrat because Bernie's not a Democrat, so he views all Democrats as establishment Democrats. I bet you that Governor Whitmer is going to kick into action up there.
Oh, big time.
I can see Debbie Dingell kicking into action. Different people across the board. I don't think anybody's going to get caught sleeping here. Most
of the labor unions and certainly you can get you have at least a shot at a big African American turnout in Detroit and elsewhere. So no, I think you're right. It's Bernie carried it last time. James, the other thing that people aren't paying enough attention to, Bernie is underperforming where he performed in 2016 everywhere. Now, granted, it was a 2 or 3 person race back then, and it's larger now, but that underperformance is not insignificant.
It is not insignificant at all. And Michigan is so important because that test his last theory of the case. And, with so few people, and if he loses that, then he again, they'll just make up something new. They're not going to stop making up their socialist fantasies, but that is going to make it more difficult.
James, with our next guest, the net worth of participants on this show has increased by about 1,700%. The IQ has also gone up. He is Roger Altman, the founder and CEO of one of the most successful firms on Wall Street, Evercore, was a top official of the Treasury Department. And he is not only one of the most successful, but one of the kindest and nicest people in that whole financial community. Roger, that'll probably hurt you with your constituency up there, but it happens to be true. Thanks for joining us. I know.
It's a killer. Well, I must add that my joining has caused the political acumen on this dialogue to plummet, but I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, that's not true. That's the only thing you'll say that's not true.
And James, I really loved your salute.
Oh, thank you. I was sitting there, and apparently they asked Clive about it this morning. He busted out laughing. He said, "I hadn't seen James in a while. I was down in New Orleans for the football game. I'm glad I didn't run into him."
Oh, that's right. He's a Clemson fan. Yeah.
Yeah.
Roger, let's talk about the coronavirus and the effect it's going to. The markets have gone wild, rationally or irrationally, down by record amounts, or at least numerically one day, up the next. But let's talk about what you see as the underlying economic effects of the global spread of this virus. What's the range of realistic projections about what it's going to do to the real economy?
Well, that's the question of the hour, of the day, of the week, and of the year. I'm going to answer it to the best of my ability, but let me say first that no human being on earth knows the answer to it.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason for that, of course, is that no one knows what the incidence of this disease will be ultimately, for example, here in the United States. And the economic impacts will derive from that incidence. And to give you an example, Los Angeles just reported in the last 15 minutes that it had declared an emergency because a series of cases of the virus had been detected or diagnosed in LA. And we're quite close in this country. And of course, this has already happened in some other countries like South Korea and Japan, let alone China.
Iran.
Yes, in Iran. We're quite close in this country to seeing the beginnings of lots of economic activity begin to slow down seriously. Now, we're not at that moment right now. I mean, the jobs figure reported this morning, it's a preliminary figure, but it was positive. But we're all anticipating that we may see a pretty sharp slowdown. And anecdotally speaking, lots of businesses now are canceling employee travel. Certain businesses are canceling external meetings. And of course, the follow-on impact on airlines, on hotels, on restaurants, on the entire economy may be pretty sharp. And that's what the financial markets are reacting to. It's probably going to be pretty sharp slowdown, but as with these other precedents, whether it's SARS or H1N1 or others, it's probably going to be what the economists call V-shaped, a deep or a sharp fall followed by a sharp rise.
Of course, that depends on, we are interested in politics, and that depends on when that sharp fall takes place and when it ends.
Well, we're quite close to the beginnings of it. I'm not smart enough to know what would push us over that line because we haven't gone over it right now. In most places in this country, activity levels have not changed yet dramatically, although you can feel it's starting, but we haven't really crossed that line yet. But the chances that we do cross it seem pretty high.
Well, let me ask one more and then turn it over to James. We'll talk about what is maybe what would normally be the unsexiest of issues, the global supply chain. And it's not just what's happening here, but a lot of these businesses, a lot of these companies depend on getting their supplies from Korea, China, elsewhere. And I read the other day that there could be a delayed response, and the worst of that effect could hit in the middle of March or end of March.
That's possible, of course. Now, the biggest supply source of all is China.
Right.
And China is seen to be beginning to recover. A series of the most draconian restrictions in China are beginning to be lifted. I actually think the greater threat is the consumer side of the economy, of our economy and the global economy. First of all, 70% of the U.S. GDP is consumer related, consumer spending driven. And if you take New York City, where I'm sitting, the moment that we see a number of cases which people interpret to be an emergency, and that's what Los Angeles just declared a few minutes ago, then transportation usage will decline, perhaps starting with the subway system, and economic activity as a whole will contract. So I think it's more likely to be severe on the consumer side because that's where most of the U.S. economy actually is.
James?
So, Roger, the stock market is like it goes up, down 800, up 1,200, down this, and I think there's a word that stock people use called volatility.
Right.
And that's not, and they have like a thing called, which I don't understand, the volatility index or something. Does
VIX.
this amount of volatility like concern people that watch this?
Yes. Well, the index you're referring to is called the VIX, VIX. It's
Okay.
it's the basic volatility index that market participants and general observers follow. It is at a very high level now, beginning 7 to 10 days ago, when markets began to really wobble. In and of itself, it's not a dire index. It just tells you that investors themselves are manifesting what I would call fear and trying to protect themselves. But what's going on in the markets is a big tug of war between the anticipated slowdown that I referred to, which will of course spill over into profits and stock prices, and on the other hand, the interest rate cuts, which first and foremost the markets themselves are driving. I mean, the 10-year Treasury this morning is below 1%.
Oh, really?
All-time record low, by the way.
Right.
And the stimulative effect of those rate cuts, which are occurring all around the world, not just here. So on the one hand, you have those rate cuts, which of course are designed to stimulate or at least cushion economic activity, and they're pulling the market in one direction, which you saw 2 days ago with the giant rally. And on the other hand, the fear of this economic contraction and no one knowing when it starts, how long it lasts, pushing the market downward. So there's two giant forces at work, and that's why, among other things, you're seeing so much volatility. 2 days ago, the market rose 1,300 points on the Dow index. Yesterday, it fell sharply. This morning, it's up again. And so there's also some U.S. political factors at work in that today. But there is this giant tug of war occurring.
So, I said the Clinton administration, which you obviously a very senior part of, and we were always told, don't mention the stock market because you don't know what's going to happen to it. It's okay, you can talk about GDP numbers or you can talk about unemployment. And Trump, and every time he'd talk about it every day, and I said, geez, if Bob Rubin, Roger Altman had to tell him to, so this is really like freaking him out because for some reason he had associated any possible chance that he's reelected to the performance of the stock market. And that the stock market is not a very good thing to tie your political fortunes to in the short term because you just don't know what it's going to do. Right.
And, it's an example of that ancient adage, live by the sword, die by the sword. Trump obviously measures himself and measures his administration and wants the world to measure him by the stock market. That's worked for him pretty well over the past 3 years of his presidency, but he's at risk now because not only is the market moving downward now in recent days by a lot. I think 2 days ago it had fallen 13% in about a week. But it was already at a very high level where the odds were, from a medium and longer term point of view, that it would more likely fall than rise. Nothing goes up forever. So I would say he's at risk in those two ways. The short term, where the virus and concerns of an economic slowdown are pushing the market down. And generally speaking, trying to continue to tie yourself to a market that's already that high where, law of averages are that it'll decline more likely than it'll keep rising. It's a dangerous game for him. So far, through the first phase of his presidency, he's gotten away with it. I'm not sure he's going to get away with it over the next 8 months between now and Election Day.
how much do those market people and the business leaders love the tax cuts they've gotten from him? How much do they lack confidence or worry about his and this administration's ability to handle what really may be their first real crisis?
You know, markets don't really operate like that, at least normally.
They don't. I mean, they don't worry about whether something's going to be handled well.
Well,
or
no,
not handled well?
the markets are much more focused on what is the incidence of this virus going to be, for example, in the United States.
Right.
Is it going to become really widespread, or isn't it? They don't say to themselves, I worry that the administration doesn't know what it's doing. Now, ultimately, those two issues could come together if we have some real mishandling of it. But at this moment, that's not the primary. You don't hear that much. You hear just how bad is the virus going to be, which in turn will drive how bad the economic slowdown is going to be, or how deep and how long it's going to last. And that's how markets typically think. If we had some really egregious mishandling by the administration, as I say, that could stir itself into the mix. But right now, you don't hear that. Now, politically speaking, of course, as you guys know better than anybody, that is a big issue. The old George W. Bush Katrina precedent and so forth, which is close to James's heart. But you don't hear much about that this minute. So much of this is state and local, Albert. I mean, there's a big debate going on in New York City just now, right now, in the last 24 hours about whether the New York City hospital system, which is already operating at near capacity, through the normal load factors, could handle a big outbreak, just in terms of hospitalization.
Right.
So it's so a lot of this is state and local rather than federal.
I wouldn't even want to think about what it's like in rural America.
Yeah.
They're closing hospitals left out. I mean,
Right.
I mean, it's so your group in New York, I understand, is engaged in what some people are claiming is a really awesome. Are you doing voter registration in Florida?
Yes, sir.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Are you at liberty to?
Well, I would just say that starting over a year ago, starting actually February of 2019, a group of us organized, researched, designed, raised money for, and ultimately in this past August, put into the field a voter registration initiative in Florida. And without going into a lot of detail, which I shouldn't, we're on track and we're getting quite close now to completing a 375,000 person voter registration program. In other words, registering 375,000 new voters in 4 markets in Florida, which happen to be Miami-Dade County, Orlando and Greater Orlando, Tampa, St. Pete, and that greater area, and certain African American communities in northern Florida. And of course, the goal is first and foremost to try to address or counter the voter suppression that has taken place in so many places around the country, but has been relentless in Florida, and the reality that Florida is a massive state from an election point of view. I mean, it's the biggest of the swing states. You guys know all that. I'm not an expert on, historically speaking, on Florida, but the Democratic Party infrastructure.
It's been a disappointment.
Yeah. Well, the Democratic Party infrastructure in the state Democratic Party, the state infrastructure on the Democratic side is not what anybody would want. And everybody in Florida knows that and acknowledges it. And I'm probably being charitable. However, a lot of grassroots activity of the type we're doing and many, many, many other people are doing is occurring, and it's pretty dynamic to see it I've been going to Florida roughly every 2 or 3 weeks for the past 13 months on our project, and it's pretty amazing to see it. So, if you ask me whether if Joe Biden turns out to be the Democratic nominee, and I know we're a long way from that, whether the state of Florida could be won in the general election, my answer is yes. I'm not predicting that. I'm saying it's perfectly doable.
Right.
And even if the state infrastructure isn't, or Democratic infrastructure isn't what it might be, you can still do it because of obviously a good national campaign from the nominee and the whole effort there, but also this 1,000 points of light approach that's going on already among activists and organizers and donors. There's a lot of it happening.
Boy, that's exciting. I would think, Roger, for projects like this, I mean, I'm going to say this, and you tell me if it's wrong. I would think that among a number of people who were very nervous, Democrats basically, money Democrats, very nervous about Bernie Sanders, that the prospect of Joe Biden might open some more wallets.
Oh, I don't think Joe Biden is going to have any longer major financial and fundraising issues. But a lot of people misjudge the attitude towards Sanders. It is twofold, but it's not all. Most people say, well, a lot of donors don't want Sanders because of his policies. Sure, there are people like that. But there's also a huge group of people, I'm one of them, who don't want Sanders because they don't think he could win. In other words, they don't see him as a vehicle for getting rid of Donald Trump. And if there's one passion that so many people have, starting with James, of course, as he's articulated.
Is he passionate about this?
Well, he's usually not very passionate about anything.
We brought him out of his shell.
Yeah, that's right. But it's getting rid of Trump. I mean, Trump is I'm sure you guys read that George Packer article in The Atlantic a couple of days ago.
Talking about it earlier, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Trump is just an existential threat to this country as we know it.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that's what the Democratic Party. What I heard last night was, and let's just get on with the job at hand. I mean, I think that's what these voters were saying in their own way. All right, we got it. We know what our job is, and as I said last night, and I said earlier in the show, it's not going to. Bernie's going to keep chugging along, but he's facing a different world now. He's facing people, a political party that is just not interested in his revolution and is desperate to get to November, and it's going to take a toll on it.
Well, I don't have the political experience you guys do, but I've never seen anything like what happened over the past 4 days. And one of the most mysterious and inexplicable things to me is my own home state of Massachusetts, where you had a home state senator campaigning strongly there. Obviously, that's Warren. You had a neighboring senator with universal name recognition campaigning hard there and drew big crowds. That's Sanders. You have a relatively liberal Democratic primary electorate. You have Senator,
a billionaire who was born there.
Yeah, you have a billionaire born there, and you have Joe Biden, who, let's say, concentrated his resources elsewhere. Biden, to the best of my knowledge, did not go to the state, didn't spend any money in the state, didn't have any people in the state, and he still won. I mean, I've seen some strange things, but that is up there.
If you think about it, the reason is these people are just, for God's sakes, let's just get to November. And I think that's what all those Massachusetts voters that turned out for Joe Biden. I think that's what they were saying. But man, we're ready to go. And it was kind of strange, but when South Carolina came in and people said, all right, that's enough. It was an amazing thing. And I don't think anybody can say that for sure they saw this coming. I mean, people did, to be fair to it, said, we know he's going to get something out of South Carolina for the next 72 hours. And I'd started to hear, a couple of people who took some polls on Sunday night said, man, the Biden numbers just really jumped in some congressional district in Illinois. And, once these primaries numbers start breaking, they just break big. And I just think the message from last night that we're sending is as clear as a bell. Let's get to November, people. We're not interested in this anymore. And unfortunately, we're going to have to go through it a few more times. But we'll see. But there's more football left to play here. But I think we're doing pretty good so far.
I think you're right. Roger, as always, we've learned from you. I'm looking for that when that V begins. But thank you very much.
Here's the encouraging thing. We have seen, things like this before, SARS,
right,
and so forth. Now, we don't know whether this could be more virulent than those, but the impact of those was clear. It was pretty clear each time. There was a sharp impact, and then we came back entirely from it as vaccines were developed and authorities got control of it. So you have to say to yourself, that's likely here. We just don't know how long that's going to take.
Yeah. Well, we'll have you back because I think this is an ongoing story. But thank you very much. And I want to thank everyone for listening to 2020 Politics War Room. Please subscribe, rate, and review. Again, be charitable. The podcast on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcast. For James Carville, I'm Al Hunt. We'll talk to you next week.